All right, folks, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at real GDP in the short run and what it looks like, the pattern that it creates over time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create this graph. So we've got a coordinate plane here, and our axes are real GDP is on the vertical axis. So as we go up, that means more output. As we go down, that means less output in the economy. And it's over time. So here is, let's say over here is like, 2015. And then as we move this way, we're 2016, 2017, 2018, maybe up to 2025, 2030. Okay? And so we're going to kind of get an idea of what economic growth or economic output looks like in an economy in the short run. What I've put over here are a bunch of market graphs, okay? And obviously on each one of these, we have price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, because that's how we draw a market graph. Each one has a supply curve and a demand curve, and I've given a sample of different kinds of markets in an economy. So for example, here's the market for dairy products like milk and cheese and yogurt. Here's the market for gasoline, which is demanded by almost everyone in the economy for their vehicles. Here's the market for light trucks. Here's the market for office furniture, the market for small electronics, and the market for home appliances. Now these, I just chose these arbitrarily. It doesn't matter that I picked these. I just wanted to show you some examples of different different markets, okay? I just wanted to show you a sample of different markets. But I want you to understand, like I said in the previous video, that there are thousands and millions of different markets in the economy, and this is just a sample. So what I want to show you is what happens to real GDP when there are changes in all of these markets and all of the other markets that are out there that I did not draw up here. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that in the light trucks market, that there's a change in production costs, that production costs go down. Okay, there's a decrease in production costs, and that would lead to an increase in supply. And so I'm going to put S prime here, and when supply increases, our quantity supplied and quantity demanded, our equilibrium quantity is going to increase. So we're going to have an increase in output. Output has gone up. Let's say that because now people are buying more trucks, they also want more gasoline. And so the demand for gasoline increases. So that means that the demand curve in the gasoline market is going to move to the right, because people want more gasoline. And so we're going to have an increase. We'll put D prime. And that means that equilibrium quantity in the gasoline market has also gone up. We have an increase in quantity, equilibrium quantity. That's an increase in output. But let's say that in the dairy market, that the costs of doing business have gone up, and that means we're going to have a decrease in supply, because when production costs go up, supply goes down. So we'll have a decrease in supply. So we'll put S prime here. That's going to result in a decrease in equilibrium quantity, because it was here, and now it has gone backwards to here. So we have a decrease in output in the dairy market. And then let's say in office furniture, people they don't want office furniture as much. Let's say they've already stocked up their offices. There's not a whole lot of new offices, so people aren't buying as much office furniture. So we have a decrease in demand in office furniture. So we'll put D prime here. And that means that our equilibrium quantity decreased. Okay. So here we have an increase in output. Here we have another increase in output in the economy. Well, in these markets, but these markets are in the economy. So that means also in the economy we have an increase in output. Down here, a decrease in output. Here we have another decrease in output. Let's say in small electronics, demand increases, people want more small electronics, and so we have an increase in demand in small electronics, so D prime. And then, so that's an increase in equilibrium quantity, because equilibrium quantity went from here over to the right, so that's an increase in quantity, so that's more output. And let's say down here in home appliances, production costs have gone down, and when production costs go down, that leads to an increase in supply. And so we have S prime, and so again on this one, just like over here in light trucks, we're going to have an increase in output. And let's say that the first thing you need to understand is that these changes are constantly happening. Nobody is like watching every single one of them. It's not like there's somebody in Washington, D.C. with a giant computer screen with thousands of market graphs on them. That's not how it's happening. This is happening behind the scenes. This is conceptual, okay? This is abstract, all right? We're just concretizing it by putting it into a market graph, okay? We're making it concrete. But here's the idea that I want to get into your head, is that overall, in this case, even though quantity is going down in a couple of the markets, in most of the markets, output is going up. Quantity is increasing in most of the markets. And so when we ball this all together into one giant snowball, or whatever you want to call it, one giant blob, overall output in the economy is increasing. It's going up. And so what we would do is, if this is happening over time, let's say all of this happened over a period of 2 or 3 months, well then over that period of 2 or 3 months, over time, we would see an increase in output within the economy. Over time, output is going up, right? All right. So then let's say after, I don't know, let's say 30, 40, 50 months, maybe a few years or whatnot, we have increases in the economy. And then some stuff happens to where all of these increases in all these markets wind up reversing, okay? Costs go up in some of the markets, so supply decreases, demand decreases because people are afraid that they're going to lose their job and not be able to pay their bills, so they stop buying things. And what ultimately happens is, in all of the markets, instead of the giant ball being an increase in output, it becomes a decrease in output, because most of the markets wind up looking more like this or this. And if we get a lot of markets that look like this, where we have a decrease in quantity, or this, another decrease in quantity, whether it's because of supply or demand, if we have a lot of markets that look like this, then overall we're going to have a decrease in quantity in the economy, and this curve is going to turn downward. Okay? And we're going to have a decrease in real GDP over time. And what typically happens in the economy over several years, maybe 10, 20, 30 years, is we have periods where output is going up, and then we have periods where output is going down, and then we'll have another period where output is going up, and then another period where output is going down, and another period where output is going up, etc., etc. And what we wind up having is this wavy looking line that tends to sort of go upward, but has periods of increase and decrease over time. So we have increase, decrease in output in real GDP, increase in GDP, decrease in GDP, increase in GDP, decrease in GDP, increase in GDP. This is typically what happens in the short run over time with economic growth, is we have these fluctuations in output, okay? And we call that real GDP in the short run. Now, this pattern that you're looking at here of ups and downs in the economy over time, ups and downs in output in the economy. It has a name in economics. We call it the business cycle. The business cycle. And I'm going to give you a definition for the business cycle. In economics, the business cycle is the pattern of economic output and activity resulting from fluctuations in real GDP over time. And now, the idea here is that the business cycle, what you're looking at here, the business cycle is based on real GDP in the short run. Okay? So the business cycle, actually I'm going to write this down here. The business cycle is based on real GDP in the short run. And now, I want to tell you, I want to explain just so that you understand, we have some technical terms. There are actually 4 things happening here, okay? There are 2 kinds of intervals here, 2 kinds of intervals. Now, an interval has a start point, and an end point. It's a period of time. That's what an interval is. And then there are 2 kinds of points. A point is not an interval. A point is a moment. It's one moment in time, okay? And so what we have here is, for example, starting here we have an interval of increase, okay? So mathematically we call this an interval of increase. This is an interval of increase. That's here. See, kind of upward arrows. Now here, if we put an arrow on here, it's kind of downward pointing. This is called an interval of decrease. That's an interval of decrease. All right, is this region right here. And then we have 2 kinds of points. This is a high point on the curve. See how it kind of goes up? We have an increase, then a high point, and then a decrease, right? A high point on a curve is called a maximum point. A maximum point. Okay, that's right here. And then this down here, this is called a minimum point. That's a low point. So we have an interval of decrease, and then we reach a low point in real GDP, and then after the low point, then we go back to an interval of increase. Okay, so this is called a minimum point, okay? And we have technical names for these 4 things in the business cycle. So when we are experiencing the business cycle in the short run, represented by short run real GDP, we can at any time say that we are either in the middle of an interval of increase, or at a maximum point, or in the middle of an interval of decrease, or at a minimum point. And the names for these things are, an interval of increase is called an economic expansion. An expansion, okay, is an interval of increase. A maximum point is called a peak. An interval of decrease, that's called an economic contraction. Contraction. Okay? And that's when real GDP is decreasing. And then a low point, a minimum point along the curve of the business cycle is called a trough. T-R-O-U-G-H. A trough. Kind of like a feeding trough for an animal. It's a low point where they put their food and they eat out of a trough like a bowl. Okay, so this is kind of like a bowl here. And so I want you to write down, I have some definitions for you. I'm going to erase these over here and you can write out the definitions. All right, an economic expansion is a period of increase in economic output in an economy. A peak is a point of maximum output in the economy. A contraction, an economic contraction, is a period of decrease in economic output in an economy. And then a trough, T-R-O-U-G-H. A trough is a point of minimum output in the economy. And this business cycle is a very important concept for politicians, for economists, for business people. If you look up on stories on the internet, maybe, stories related to the economy or to finance or to business, they'll talk about whether the economy is experiencing an expansion or a contraction. And people get afraid when we're in an economic contraction because they know that people are likely to lose their jobs. There's more unemployment during an economic contraction. But during an economic expansion, there are usually more jobs available. But the only way, and typically what happens is we go up, 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 and eventually we reach a peak. And the peak is an awesome thing because there's a lot of output in the economy, but it's also a scary thing because right after the peak is an economic contraction. And even though a contraction is sort of a scary thing because of the unemployment and the uncertainty, eventually we will reach a low point in output, which is kind of scary, but we know that right on the other side of a trough is an economic expansion. And there's something else to consider here. Notice, look at this peak right here. Do you see this peak? That's a high point in the economy, right? So people were really happy whenever that happened, right? But here's the funny thing. That peak is actually lower than this trough. So actually, people are happier, or they should be happier during this trough than they were, let's say, 12 years ago during this peak, because there was more economic output during that trough than there was during that peak. And so you have to try and consider things, put things into perspective where you're comparing, even though, let's say right now we're in a contraction, an economic contraction, you still have to ask yourself, well, but am I better off than I was, let's say, 10 years ago? So even if I'm in an economic contraction, but if I still have more stuff, if I'm still doing better now than I was 10 years ago, then the contraction today is still better than the expansion 10 years ago. And I know that that's weird to think about, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with that. But it's very important for you to understand the business cycle and the different parts of a business cycle. And what we're now going to do is we're going to move on to discussing long-run economic growth.